The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any health concerns. Take care of yourself out there.
Welcome to Unravelling. This is a podcast that sees the world through the lens of mental health. I'm Mary Wilson, a journalist.
And I'm Kurt White, a social worker and psychotherapist. Now, Mary, let me ask you a question. When do you feel most creative in your life right now?
Right now, yeah, because my creative moments have probably evolved over the years, starting from putting on plays and being involved in theater and chorus when I was younger, and then pursuing the journalism career. I really got to tell stories and use video and talk to people, and I would love to pull all those elements together and craft a final finished product. And I still get to do some of that storytelling today here at the retreat.
Yes, I'm very glad for that. It's for sure doing this with you is a huge creative outlet for me. And it feels good, doesn't it, when you tap into that vein of creativity in day-to-day life?
It really does. Yeah, it's not just for artists, right? It's for all of us.
That's right. I mean, and it's a thing I've come to think a lot about as a therapist. Because I think, what are the developmental roots of creativity? Where does it come from? Because I think if you watch children, they seem almost naturally creative, don't they?
They really do. Yeah, my 1.5-year-old is already pretend feeding his stuffed animals and rocking them to sleep, and it just already has such an imagination at such a young age.
It is. And I think, there have been people in my field that have sort of said that, actually, that kind of creative world, that playful world where a thing can be true and not true at the same time, where you can sort of feel your way into things. That's actually sort of the normal developmental thing, the way that we sort of build our relationships with others, learn how to be in groups, learn how to be in relationships with others. And it's kind of fascinating that then in adulthood we sometimes relegate creativity to sort of maybe very few moments, or to the purview of those who are in creative professions like painters or sculptors or filmmakers, for example, right?
Yeah, it seems harder and harder to sort of tap into that playfulness the older you get.
Yeah. So I wanted to see if we could explore in the next couple of episodes just sort of what this is. What is this relationship of creativity? How does it connect to mental health, to well-being, and to this sort of complicated task of being human?
And you found just the perfect person to speak to about creativity, and it's an old friend of yours, a filmmaker.
Yes, we knew each other from the University of Chicago when we were both undergraduates. I'm very lucky to know and be friends with Aleem Hossain, who's a writer and director of feature films, television, and experimental cinema. He's the associate professor of digital storytelling at Occidental College in Los Angeles, where he teaches filmmaking and screenwriting, and has done a number of creative films and projects, including a feature film, After We Leave, which won some prestigious awards, Best Feature Film at the Sci-Fi London Festival and Best Director at the Berlin Sci-Fi Festival. Has a number of short films, The Thin Orange Line and On the Blue Table, among others. And also, I think, is really a creative person in many ways. I think, both in terms of his professional work, but also as a deep thinker who is really engaged with this idea about what is this all about? What is this creative impulse anyway? And how is it working in people? What is it for? And why should we cultivate it? In a world where maybe it's not going to be necessarily rewarded financially to do so. What is the sort of fundamental purpose of all of this? And I really wanted to talk with him about all of those things.
I'm so glad you had this connection. Let's take a listen. Hi, Mary cutting in to thank you for listening and to ask that you please give us a good review and share with a friend if you're enjoying what you're hearing.
And we're also interested in hearing from you. If you have thoughts, feedback, suggestions for further topics that we might discuss, or anything you'd like to share, you can call us and leave a message at 1-802-258-POD3. That's 802 258-POD3 or send us an email or a voice memo at Unravel, UNRAVEL, at brattlebororetreat.org. Unravel at brattlebororetreat.org. We'll put that also in the show notes.
Back to the show.
Aleem Hossain, welcome to Unraveling.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I was hoping that in this time we have today, we could talk a bit about creativity and what that means. And I think that it's an important issue related to mental health. And I hope we get into some of the whys of it. But I really wanted to talk to somebody who has made their life out of creative endeavors. And so you're a filmmaker.
I am, yeah. And I think that, I think in two ways I've made my life out of a creative endeavor. And I think it's actually important to separate the two. The one that's the most obvious is that professionally, I actually work as a filmmaker and I'm a professor of film at Occidental College. And so I make my living that way. But the reason that I sort of say that separate from the next thing, which is, I make art, I'm creative in my life. And I really think that those two things, can be separate, that there's a lot of value, and maybe the most value that comes in my life from creativity is not because I do it for a living. It's because it's just a tremendously rewarding and helpful and wonderful thing that I enjoy doing, that I think everyone can do. And then, yes, there's this second way in which I've kind of gone even further, right? Yeah, I spend most of my waking hours either teaching artistic creation or doing it myself.
And I'm curious I want to ask you about this in the sort of developmental life course of your own creativity, which is sort of like, it puts a smile on my face because I remember some of it, having known you from a long time ago. And, I think as I remembered in college, it wasn't sort of inevitable that was going to be your path, was it?
It was not. And I would say, for reasons that I think have to do more with me than some of the traditional answers. I'm a mixed race individual. My father is an immigrant from Bangladesh. My mom, is a white lady, grew up here in the States, and she was raised Catholic. And I grew up in this multicultural family. And I think a lot of times the cliche, especially with an immigrant parent, would be there'd be this very strong, don't go into the arts, it's trouble. And the funny thing is, I grew up in a house where my parents were cinephiles, and they were thrilled at the idea of me being creative. I actually just, for whatever reason, I just couldn't quite find the courage and the entitlement early on to just say that's what I would do as a living. I think I always thought, I might write short stories or I might do this or that on the side. But no, yeah, I wanted to have a very practical career. I thought about being a lawyer or, going into public service, potentially being an academic. And I had, I think, a series, no one dawning moment, but it's a series of experiences where I began to realize, wow, I feel so good when I'm creating. And then further, it took me a little while to learn, it's an even harder thing to learn. And I'm learning about myself by being creative, and it helps me process things, and it's a place to put some feelings. And then when you're creative at a certain level, you're actually engaging with other human beings because they interact with it. And that journey took a while. And I think partly because I didn't know that it was okay to say yes to that. I tell my students a lot, we should give ourselves more freedom to be creative. It's worthwhile.
I love that. And being at the University of Chicago, the other pathway in life was something that you really could have had. That's a place that it sets people up for that if you want to have it, right? A life in public service, an academic life, a life as a lawyer, a successful business person. We know many people that went on to do that. They give more money to the Alumni Association than
they
us.
do.
Right? It's okay. They can buy us dinner. It's okay, right? And actually, it strikes me like you got into film at a time when that was hard to do there. You made room for that for yourself as a passion project. I'm curious, what was it what were those experiences that drove you into that got you to feel like it was okay to say yes to that?
The first thing is I feel incredibly lucky to have done it. In some ways, look, this is not true for all folks, but for me, just speaking for me, I feel like I dodged a bullet. I feel like I would not be as happy and fulfilled a person as I am now. Look, I have my share of problems. I'm definitely not happy every day. None of us probably should be, right? But in aggregate, I think it's clear to me that I'm very lucky that I found this path. because you're right, it wasn't obvious there. I think I credit some of my friendships actually in helping with this, yourself included, back in the day, which is that like I discovered later than the rest of all of the people I was hanging out with, oh, I'm the guy who wants to stay like an extra hour at the diner to deconstruct that movie. And I'm the guy who, like, I got the creative writing assignment to write like a 2-page flash fiction story, and I wrote 15 of them. Like I just started to realize like, oh, if I'm given the space, I kind of run away with this without thinking. And here's the leap, and this is just something I can't quite figure out why, which is that I just started to notice that. And I had permission to notice it. I had space to notice it. Let's be honest. I really want to stress this. I grew up relatively privileged. My parents are professionals, I didn't grow up super rich, but they're professionals. I didn't worry about money, in that sense. And so I think I did have the space to be like, oh, I could pursue this a little bit. I could think about this a little bit and devote some time to it. And it is interesting because, let's be honest, like in terms of actual examples, I didn't see a lot of half South Asian kids, growing up and doing these things. And film was really closed off. It was hard to even find books about it. We were way before YouTube and this. And I taught myself how to use a video camera by nothing else than I'll just trial and error until it looks right. And that was days and weeks of doing that, and I think that I'm lucky I think I grew up in an environment that gave me a growth mindset. And I think that growth mindset, the idea of like, I can just blunder around, and I carry that with me to this day. I think actually one of the most important aspects I find of being creative is putting myself in a space where I think, okay, there's no end goal. I'm just going to try and see what happens. And I got to do that at college because there were courses that I could take, even if they weren't creative courses, that had some space for that. And I had some mentors, and I had time to sort of do stuff on my own. And it led me down this path where I am now. I split my time between making films and teaching it.
It's an interesting thing because culturally, I think we valued the idea of exploring yourself in college. There is a class element to that and probably a race element to it all. But I do think it was expressed as a value a bit more. And I think as the price of tuition and things like that went up, I don't hear as much talk like that these days among young people when I talk to them.
I would say, I think you probably agree, we grew up in the time where the do what you love, follow your dream had no asterisk attached to it yet, right? I think for me at least, I was still living in like the 90s version of that where it hadn't been troubled and it hadn't been, caveated. The year 2000, I said, I'm going to move to Los Angeles and I'm going to go to film school, and I'm going to, and I remember some people being like, you're going to do what? But to me, I was like, this is what we've been doing, right? We came to this college, we studied all sorts of different subjects, we exposed ourselves to different things. I went to museums, I went to movies, and it all churned around in my brain and in my heart. And I was like, all right, I'm going to just take a leap and do this. And I actually try to resurrect that and relive that feeling at the start of every project. Like whenever I start a new film, or even when I'm engaging with my students, I try to put aside some of the experience I have with the film industry or with, the practice of what it takes to make a movie, and just remember, I made this leap not to finish a day of filming on time and on schedule, or to satisfy the budgetary and content requirements of a job. I made this leap because I wanted to risk things and explore things. And so I try to imagine that 18-year-old, 22-year-old version of myself every time I start, because that was a moment when I just took this leap and I wasn't so bogged down with some of those other thoughts. The more I can do that, the better the art turns out.
What would you call that mind frame? I love that.
Yeah, to me, it is an openness to letting the project or the art or the creative impulse show me where it wants to go and what it wants to teach me. There's an early phase where I've learned, if I just feel something, I have a little itch or a little thought, or that was interesting, I've actually learned to not interrogate why. Just to listen to it and to follow it. And it is a lot of times, by the way, leading me down a path I didn't expect. Every once in a while, sure, it's a dead end, but that's okay. And I just follow it because if I try to too early define it, I'm closing off doors, and I don't get someplace I really want to go. I just want to learn from it. And then at a certain point when I have a feeling of okay, I think this is what I want to express, or this is what was going on in my mind that led me here. And I've now learned this and see myself more clearly. If that's the thing I followed here, now let's do some critical thinking and some hard work to figure out how to deliver that in the best form possible in the film or in the script or, in the short story, whatever it might be. But I can't turn on that second phase too early. I think if I do, the project is usually less exciting to me and sort of less interesting and less revelatory to me. And by the way, most of the time I find connects less well with audiences, like at least in my experience.
Yeah. I found a similar thing myself, I think, in my work as I've gotten, I hate to use the word, but expert in it. I mean, therapy is sort of impossibly hard, but it never stops challenging me. But on another level, I'm pretty good at it and I know how to do it. And I think actually the experience of being involved with this podcast, if it isn't too meta for us, it's really a thing I didn't know how to do. I know how to talk to people, but I don't know anything about it. I had to go ask people to know how to do it. I had to sort of say to my co-host, Mary, Mary, how do we do this together? What is this like? And I found it has lit up something inside of me that I didn't even know wasn't lit up until it got lit up again. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I think we know the value of new experiences, but I think quite honestly, I think they're only so valuable. I think it really it's a special category of new experience, where it's when you enter a whole other way of thinking, where a whole other set of things are valued, these big paradigmatic shifts, right? That's really just wonderful stuff. And I have similarly noticed, I think actually expertise can sometimes be the enemy of creativity because you get comfortable. I remember a moment in 2018, I was on set for a web series I was making, and I showed up on the first day, and I thought to myself, I know exactly how this day is going to go. When you show up on the first day of films, you have a schedule, you have a shot list, everything you're going to shoot that day. And I could see perfectly everything that I would execute in that day. And I was like, I'm going to competently execute this shot list and be done by 5 p.m. And I thought that, and I did that, and I went home. And if I was being hyperbolic, I would say I cried, but I felt like crying. It's weird, because I realized, wait a minute, I didn't do all this to competently execute a plan at a job. If I'm going to be making movies, if I'm going to be making art, I want it to be exciting and mind expanding and a little scary. And so I've sort of set myself this rule now of, I want to have the butterflies. That if I go into a project where I have no butterflies, no nervousness, something's off. Now, look, I don't want sheer terror also. That's not a great place to live, right? But I think that another aspect for me, when I think of myself being really creative, is being, there's a little bit of nervousness there. I don't know what's going to happen. I read an interview years ago with Conan O'Brien where he was saying that it was almost his goal that 30% of the jokes in a week while doing The Tonight Show would fail. Because if they didn't, then that meant he wasn't trying enough. If 100% of them got laughs, and so I think that's been my mantra. And I've realized now that a little bit of willing to risk is actually tied up with creativity. That introducing a little bit of risk in this way, an openness, and I don't know what's going to happen, actually has done wonders for my overall fear of the future or my overall sense of worrying about things. When I find myself in the flow of a project, it's a great flow state. And even though there are many creative uncertainties, the fact that it makes my brain think differently and that I learn things about myself, it's actually a real antidote to the more concrete types of what's going to happen next and I can't control this and that kind of thing. It's really actually been quite helpful for me, I think.
Yeah, that it stays with you even after the sort of the project part of it.
Absolutely. In the same way that, I feel the benefit of the yoga class or the run that I go for long after it's ended. And then when I'm in the groove on that, it's the same way for me. It is the more I do it and the more frequently I can touch that area, the better I feel just in general.
Yeah. In my field, it's sort of filled with these kinds of disappointing, binaries of health or illness, for one, for example, and we don't like illness, we like health. But if you sort of poke at that, what is health? You sort of get into these hard to define things. Well, it's the absence of illness. Well, all right. That's sort of really disappointing, but and Freud says, the ability to work and to love, that's a little better. But what about everything else? I mean, even if you sort of don't interrogate it too much and you get to some health, what are you supposed to do with all this health, right? I mean, what's it for, right? And I think, like, to me, I think that there's sort of the creativity part is sort of like, isn't that what this is for, actually?
Yeah, and I think that sort of brings me back to this idea of like, I actually worry a little bit about the fact that we feel like the only folks who can be creative are the professional and quote artists, right? Again, in my other job, I engage with this wonderful series of 18 to 22-year-olds, right? And look, the for sure truth is that very few of them will go on to become Steven Spielberg or even to work in Hollywood necessarily. And over the years, I've realized that rather than me thinking, oh no, well, why am I teaching them these skills? It is a fool's errand. What I've realized is like, oh, actually, what I'm trying to do is to lead them to learn to be creative and how you can find your own creative impulses and put them into play and benefit from them is a life skill that is part of the answer of what do we do once our material needs are met? It doesn't have to be some strange new agey thought to say like, why are we here? I think we're here for something profound. And I think one of those ways could be, no matter what your answer is to our role in the universe, from completely, atheistic to completely religious, like wherever you are on that spectrum, there's this other question of just like, how do you view the things beyond the base requirements for living? And to me, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm here because I want to have a little bit of profundity and I want to have a little bit of like awe in my life. And I find that I get that from experiencing other folks' art and other folks' creativity. And then I also get it from doing it myself.
I think awe is a feeling or an emotion we talk very little about, actually, in this field. I think it's very important, and I'm glad you bring it up.
I love awe, and I love it in particular, Kurt, in a very modest way. Like, I think we all know, like, titanic things that can cause awe in us, that we might see or might happen, but like to me, like I really try to cultivate just remembering that I can be in awe of really, really small things, of just, like these little facts you learn, when you're a kid, like, oh, the maple tree flips its leaves over in the rain, or how does Shohei Ohtani, every time he has to hit the ball when he really needs to, he hits the ball when he really needs to. Like, I'm in awe of that, like that, like, and I actually feel like I've gone through these periods of my life recently where that's become hard. Like, I'm a little bit more in survival mode than I want to be, whether it's the pandemic or it's politics or it's the economy or the environment. What happens is when I'm in that crisis mode, my attention is much less deep. And I think the thing I've realized is that, like, it's not that there's less awe-inspiring things in the world or that there's less magic in the world. It's that it turns out like awe and magic are just what happens when you can pay attention deeply. Being creative and saying, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to draw, I'm going to sketch, I'm going to make a movie, I'm going to write a story. It actually just gives me space to put aside some of the other things and be open to experiencing that kind of awe in that small A way.
I love that. I think it's an interesting thing. You think about the creative process because there's a sort of an internal part of it. How does it work on us? And then but then also it's sort of like it relates to the way we perceive the world and take it in, right? So there's the inside part, that side part. And then I think there's like the next turn of the screw is then that we do something with it. We put something back out there, actually, right? We produce a thing that then also itself other people can take in.
Yeah, that's something that I encourage everyone to do, even if they're not someone who thinks of themselves as working professionally as an artist, right? Like, I think that there's a really great value in sharing what you've made. I think it's one of those experiences that very frequently causes feelings of, oh, it's not, my work's not good enough, or I'm nervous about it. It is interesting. Like, it's clearly a powerful thing to share your work with others. And I can tell that just by virtue of the fact that even to this day, I get a little nervous every time I do it. And I think that that's because, and this is what's amazing about it, you're sharing yourself, right? Like, it may seem a little cliche, but like if you've put yourself into some sort of creative pursuit, a painting you painted, a hat you knit in a funny way, a movie I made, like when you share it, I do think you're frequently sharing a part of yourself that you don't usually share in conversation or how you dress or how you write about yourself. You're sharing a different part of yourself. And the good news is that for most of us, I'm no longer in this category. For most of us, there isn't a professional class of critics who are actually going to write up and tell you they don't like the work. Like for most of us, if we share the work, the thing we will find is that people actually really enjoy what you've shared and honestly feel privileged to have had it shared with them. And then that they gain so much from what they bring to it, right? There's a creative work is really what it means to each audience member is part of them and part of the work, right? They watch the film or they look at the painting, but really they're bringing themselves to it as well. And so a thing, this 2 + 2 = 5 thing happens, right? Like where they bring something new to it. And I love seeing that happen too, even when it's not what I intended. Like I just love seeing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
There's another very interesting audience for your work, which is the you in the future. I love going back and looking at the work I made 20, 25 years ago, or, the stuff I wrote in high school and in college. It's endlessly fascinating because now enough time has passed that I'm a different person. And I love experiencing that as well. I find that I love that in addition to there are photographs of my life and there, I have note cards, a card my mom wrote me, and I have a newspaper article. Another thing that I have that is another kind of document of my life is my creative work, and I can see what this younger artist, this younger person was thinking and feeling. And that's pretty great too.
What does it feel like to look at it?
With the much earlier work, I find it goes through a phase. If we're sort of thinking like one phase earlier, which is probably in my mind about like everything I've made 5 or 6 years ago, it's actually always very hard because I'm close enough to the person I was, but I see some imperfections. I'm better now. I could do that better. Oh man, I wish I could have, maybe I didn't have enough distance from that, right? But I find that once we're about 10 years out, I'm just spitballing these numbers, but once we're about 10 years out, then I just feel very lucky because I find that it makes me viscerally be able to remember things that maybe I only intellectually remember. Oh yeah, I was so enthusiastic about that. Or, oh, I was really hurt by that, wasn't I? And I know that implicitly, right? I can remember that. But sometimes it's like a sense memory. It's that Proustian thing of like, oh, wow, that's the Madeline, like really bringing the, just like thinking like, okay, yeah. And so I find that interesting. And then when I see my earliest work, like I read, short stories that I wrote in middle school, I have two feelings. One, it's just so charming to see some of the through lines too. Oh, look, I was always interested in science fiction and genre. And oh, look, I was always interested in sort of mixing forms. I also think, though, how incredibly grateful I am to everyone who encouraged me. Because when I read it now, I don't think all of it is, in quotes, very good. Although, by the way, I actually really don't believe in sort of thinking that way. But I think, quite honestly, like if I read it now, I'd be like, I'm so happy that my teachers and mentors and peers saw something in there. They told me to keep going. That's all that there was there, right? Like in terms of my professional work, it wasn't like I was writing stuff that was ready to be published in the New Yorker or ready to be, released in theaters, but people encouraged me. And I think about like that was another value of sharing the work was I shared the work, and it was incredibly fortifying to have people that I looked up to read the work or watch the work and tell me to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of reactions to that. It's a very emotional, actually, to hear you say that. It conjures a community too. I didn't expect you to say that. I don't know what I expect you to say, but like now that you say it, I have that feeling too. It's a part of the value, I think, of looking back at past work. It's and very often more and more as time goes on, a community of folks that are no longer with us. So and I also had the thought that it. One of the things that sort of is characteristic of health is a sense of coherence, actually, coherence over time, that I'm not just over time, but, that I'm that person too, even though I'm not that person now, I am that person. And I have that, I think, when I look back at things. Sometimes I look back at things and I think, even just the feeling like, oh, I definitely wrote that. Like that's definitely me. That's nobody else.
Yeah, even the things that change, when you can be returned to them being immediate and visceral and like what it was like to have them in the moment, it does give you that sense of coherence. Like there are some times which like I look back just through my memory and I'll think like, I made that choice, or, like that was my opinion about that. But if I look at the piece of art or I see the right photograph and I can really like go back in time in that way and remember what it was like to be in it, then interestingly, even if I might have a different course of action, different opinion now, I can feel, oh yes, that is the person that I am. Some different mix between now and then of experiences and, and outcomes has maybe like shifted how I might do it now, but I can feel that that's the same me. To me, it prevents me feeling alienated from my own past. And by the way, I find this when I experience art as well. And it's one of my hopes that when I make art is that I'm also causing people to think back about their own experiences or their own emotions. And, they can be a vehicle for connecting with that, right? Like there are many, many people for whom the only time they cry in a year is during a movie, and I'm like a huge believer of like, I think it's good to cry during movies. I think it's good that art gives us the space to do some of these things and to reflect on certain things. It's obviously one of the reasons I think, by the way, all the big issues of our time really matter when it comes to art in terms of inclusion and representation, because it really is a space where we reflect, right? But I think at its core, like it's kind of neat to sort of find that one result of creativity is to create space, not just for you, but for other people to think about their past and their present and what they feel. And, sometimes we come to art to find experiences that echo our own. Sometimes we come to it to find new ones, and I love that it creates that space.
Do you think there's a creativity in the consuming and in that sense?
I do. And I would say that one of the questions I have right now in this current moment is whether in any way that's shifted. I'm curious whether some shift in the way our attention is pulled and the way we experience a lot of even art, that, the fact that many of us are watching things while doing something else or, glancing at a picture of a painting on our phone instead of being in the museum. Like, I'm curious whether that's shifting the creativity that I know for me is present when I'm experiencing art. And I don't know yet. Actually, I'm not actually ready to throw in the towel or to say that somehow we're worse at it now than we used to be. But it's on my mind, like I find if I draw from the research subject of my own life, right? Like I read a little less deeply now overall. I read fewer literary novels than I used to. And I spend less time really just watching a movie with no other distractions. And I wonder, like, what is that doing? Am I bringing any less creativity? Is there any less alchemy happening? And I don't know. I think that's probably the kind of thing that it'll be more of a look back on, but it absolutely is a creative space to view and to experience. Because by the way, so much art requires the suspension of disbelief, right? Like it requires us to bring to it a certain sense of magic and a leap of faith. I'm going to pretend that, yes, what I'm looking at is actually, a thing that I can perceive as a person and not just oil on canvas, right? Like I'm going to imagine that, yes, I'm going to engage with the story set on Mars in the year 2250, right? Like already I'm being invited to take some leaps in my mind, right? And some of my happiest moments are when I really get swept away experiencing a film or a book or a painting or something like that.
I want to ask about the idea that maybe it's gotten harder, actually, and that might be related to social process. I feel this inside myself, too. I think it's hard, actually, to consume a real creative work, a work that is sort of looking to transform you a little bit, to looking to have you a little bit different when you come out of the theater or turn the last page of the book. And I'm thinking, like, man, it's tough out there. I'm trying to hang on to the me I know. I don't know if I can I handle transforming it today? I'm not totally sure. It's probably good, but it's like work. There's a work in it, right? And maybe the world makes it harder. Like that's one part, but maybe then there's also the other part that like, it feels like only some media is trying to do that, and some of it is trying to do it in a way that doesn't feel generative, but feels manipulative to me. Actually, it feels like it's going to make me cry, but not because it cares about me, because it knows the algorithm of things that going to make me cry.
Yeah, I think both things you said are probably true. I think an immense number of really, really smart people have spent billions of dollars to create a kind of media experience that grabs our attention in a way that is dialed up to 105%, and holds it by generating just a sort of reactive cycle of some extreme emotion. I'm going to go in a doom spiral. I'm going to go in a cute spiral, whatever it is, and holds it in a way where we don't have to do a lot of active thinking. The YouTube algorithm is a great example of this, just jumping from video to video, and it's always to the extreme. And I do think that, a lot of the art that I have found most valuable was actually thinking about in its construction. This could apply to all different art forms, poetry and painting and, audio stories. But I think about film a lot. I think it was constructed with the idea that we have to balance when we're giving the audience time to contemplate versus react. And I think many of my favorite films have an ebb and flow, right? Moments where I'm just viscerally riding a wave, and then moments when I'm like, oh, now I'm pondering and reflecting back to scene 3 now that I'm over here, and I do think that there's a chance, right, that we're seeing a lot of media that isn't trying to give us that, intentionally so. I know for me, like, I want less of that. I can feel that it makes my brain feel different when I really think about it. That feeling in my head when I'm scrolling through social media or just watching a kind of video that's been constructed to just like hit me with these facts over and over and over again. I think I would say it's the opposite of how I feel when I'm being most creative. And it doesn't feel good, even though it holds me and sucks me in, and to me, like, I mean, this is not a new analogy, but I do think about, like, I am glad cupcakes and ice cream exist because I love them. But, quite honestly, if you sat me down at a table and just all I had to eat were cupcakes, I would probably eat longer than I wanted to, and I wouldn't feel good. And I think there are forces in our world, in our economy, and in our politics that would say that's nonsense. But there's something there. I think that I'm being fed this highly attractive, highly stimulating thing. But the weird thing is that when that's all I get, I don't feel good.
No, it's and it also increasingly to me has the quality of I think, to paraphrase Bilbo Baggins, it's like too little butter spread across too much toast. It's sort of like I'm being sort of fed something that is simultaneously meant to manipulate me and doesn't feel like a meal. I still feel like I'm recovering from watching Ikiru in 1997. You know what I mean? Like I'm not fully back to balance yet after I watched that damn film. You know what I mean? Like a powerful enough creative experience, like, is really transformative. And I wonder, I wonder about that. What do you think about this transformative power of both sort of producing and receiving creative input?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I think I wouldn't be a filmmaker if it weren't for some of these films that I watched, as a kid, as a middle school or high school or a college student, even, this past year, I saw a couple films that I think really, they did change me. The thing that I can most immediately speak to, though, is how much being creative has changed me. I made this film recently where, again, I was following an impulse. I put out a call onto the internet. Hey, people, send me the voicemail you would send back to your high school self. And I got these voicemails and I listened to them and they changed me. I listened to them, and the first half of so many of them, Kurt, it was so hard to listen to because they were saying, hey, you 16-year-old self, you're hurting, or you're angry, or you're lost. And I heard that, and that alone was changing because, quite honestly, I think maybe I hadn't thought about that in a little while, But the thing that I loved, and this is the thing that changed me most, because I think at the end of the day, I'm not always the most earnest person in the world. Almost every one of them ended with such love for that past self from their present self. They ended with, I love you, looking backwards, and you should love you. And the thing I learned, and the thing that changed was, like, I was really emotional about that. I listened to these voicemails for a long time, and I eventually combined them in actually a rather crazy way. I made a little animated sci-fi short film out of them. But separate from the art, which I'm very happy. I love the product that I created on the Blue Table, but I'm a different person now. I would say that I made that film a couple years ago, and still probably once a month, I'll be talking with someone and think they probably have one of those voicemails in them too.
I love that. What would you say to somebody that maybe is trying to struggle with their own creativity and maybe having some trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is you have to start from a place where there are no results. And we talked a lot about just now about how an important part of creativity is sharing, but quite honestly, when I teach basic creative ideas and creative thinking to my students, actually one of the first exercises I do is I give them a little writing prompt where I tell them you will never have to show this to anyone. And I've actually found that, like, saying I'm going to give you a prompt, you don't know what it is, I'm going to ask you write about the first person whose face pops into your mind, or write about, something simple like a place you've been. Just tell me what you see when you write about it. Like, and they don't know that they're going to do that. And I tell them, and you're never going to show it to anyone. And what I'm trying to do is say a lot of the reasons people struggle is we're so used to result-oriented thinking. Okay, I have a task, I got to achieve this, so if you can find a way to even artificially trick yourself into not having that task and then not judging what you do, just try something. Paint, scribble. I think coloring books are amazing. Coloring books are like the halfway step to sort of just more loose creativity, because you can get into a flow. Just color a coloring book. Sit at your desk and tap out a rhythm with your fingers. Make a song. Like just any kind of moment where there's no reason to do it other than I'm just having a little fun here. I think that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing, that occurs to me is I don't know if there's any forcing it, right? I think that, so it's less working hard at the creativity and more asking yourself, where in your life can you give yourself the space to let your brain wander into that mode? Standing in the shower is a very big moment for me when my mind wanders. Going for a run is one of those spaces. And so I think, like, I have learned that, the first thing that makes being creative or finding a little creative outlet easier is to carve out some space for it. And again, to remember that doesn't need to be, oh, you have the privilege of setting aside several days a week to, like, write a novel. No, that can literally be find 15 minutes and do just do a brain dump. Just write every thought in your head, or find 15 minutes and draw 25 aliens quick on a piece of paper. Go, and
I'm gonna try that.
And it's a great one. I love that one. And even 15 minutes, like, you will be surprised. The thing I have now, especially, I have kids, I have another job. Even 15 to 30 minutes, every other day. Let's not even get into do it every day. We're all busy. 15 to 30 minutes every other day adds up to a surprising amount when you get to the end of the month. And you might find that, like, going for a run or this and that, like, it feels good. And then you might be able to make space for some more.
And I found sometimes that, like, I think sometimes we talk about, like, again, health, illness, creativity, that, like, when you get healthier, then you'll be more creative or something like that. But actually, like, sometimes I find, and people surprise me, like in therapy, they'll tell me, like, I just got out of jail, but I'm writing a book,
Yes.
Oh, okay. Really? Like, yes. All right, you don't have a house, but you're writing a book. Like, so much for Maslow and his hierarchy of needs or something, right? Like, I think we really have it wrong, don't we? I mean, like, I think we're creative beings when we're suffering. We're creative beings when we're suffering less. It's in us all the time.
I've had the last few semesters, especially, I work on a college campus where, the politics of our time loom very large in the minds of these young people. And they will come to class and they will say, Professor Hossain, like, I'm sorry, I'm really, like, I'm so distracted, I can't be creative, or I'm so overwhelmed, I can't be creative. And of course, like, the first thing I say is, like, I get it, right? Like, we live in difficult times, right? But I also suggest flipping the script to them, which is to say, rather than those things being things that distract you from being creative, it might be that being creative is a very nice distraction from those things, is a very nice refuge from those things, and maybe even a very nice balm, antidote to those things. That actually you don't need to wait to some perfect space of mental clarity and peace to be creative. Try to dive in, and you might actually find that you enter a flow state that is exactly what you needed to deal with that other stuff. I think it really can be that.
Aleem, thank you so much for joining me here and having this conversation. It's been a really great joy and a highlight of my month. It's been fantastic.
It was great to be here. I love talking about stuff like this, so thank you so much for having me.
again to Aleem Hossain for that wonderful, very special conversation. Joining me again here is Mary. Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Yeah. What do you make of all this? What does it inspire in you?
It really is inspiring just to remember how important things like creativity and play might be, even if they seem like they're just for kids. They really are for all of us. And like I mentioned in the introduction, I'm getting to see the world through the eyes of a toddler now. And so I'm just seeing how important it is to have that playtime and just the benefits that come from being creative.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing with children. I got to say, I sort of reminded of it again hearing you talk about it. I mean, there was actually a short film. Aleem and I talked about it a little bit as we were getting ready for this conversation. And he knew the film and the filmmakers of someone that had just recorded their children at play and then made an animated film, kind of imagining the things that they were thinking in their heads, and you could sort of see the whole worlds come up and fall apart, and it's a sort of so natural in that way,
Yeah.
from such a young age, and you think, well, how can we? I think for me, some of what sticks is how do we sort of, if that's the baseline that's in us all the time, really, right? I mean, if that's the natural thing, the natural
Innate,
state,
yeah.
right? Innate, and that we don't, and that we're just kind of misunderstanding it, that even in dark and difficult times, or that might feel that way to some folks, how can we also still stay connected to that?
How are you able to get to that place, which I know can be difficult?
Yeah, well, I think if I'm being honest, I think I don't always leave enough space for it. Actually, I think I overschedule myself, and I commit to a lot of things, and the rest. I guess I try to approach the things that I do with that kind of energy if I can. I mean, the practice of doing psychotherapy can be a very creative kind of thing in a certain sense. You have to kind of find your way into the middle of things and help a person perhaps find a new way to look at their lives or their situation in the world, and so if you're really in it, as a therapist, you're sort of practicing it in that sense. But on the other hand, I think like some of Aleem's practical strategies, like I think I'm going to sit down and draw a bunch of aliens. Actually, like I
would love to see
it's gonna open me up a little bit. I think as I think I need a little bit of that kind of intentionality to things. I have a book in me somewhere, and I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's fiction. Who knows, right? Wouldn't that be wild? Wouldn't that be wild?
Got to set aside that time to write it.
Right? I've just got to do that. Well, may we all do that. Maybe you could draw the aliens with me.
That would be fun.
Wouldn't it be?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Unravelling is brought to you by Brattleboro Retreat. Our producers at Charts and Leisure are Andrew Atkin, Hans Butow, and Jason Oberholzer.
And you can find us on social media by searching Brattleboro Retreat. Brattleboro Retreat is committed to exploring diverse perspectives on mental health. While we invite hosts and guests to share their insights, the views expressed are their own and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of the hospital or its staff.